I'm super excited about what I want to talk about tonight, so I'm very grateful for this opportunity. An amazingly wonderful thing happened to me about 2.5 years ago that changed every cell in my body radically. I was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. And I can still say wonderful. Now what I would really like to share with you today is how I got from that totally panicked person who came home from that diagnosis to the person I am today, who is saying it was the best thing that ever happened to me. What I found in this amazing situation where I went home to a cabin as isolated as possible. I had just found this place, so I had a huge amount of time to really look. And as someone who had eaten organic since I was 20, someone who had always lived in places that had fresh air, and who had meditated and was a psychologist, why did this happen to me was a really big question for me. Anybody else have this question when something really big comes up like this? Yeah. Well, what I found was an inquiry, a mental inquiry. It really didn't have much to do with nutrition or any of those other things. It was what is going on in my mind that may have created this. Fortunately, a number of years prior to this time, almost 40 years prior, I met an amazing teacher who said, look, you want peace, you want happiness in your life, you want all these things, you're going to have to turn just about everything you believe about 180 degrees. And I then proceeded to study with this person and realized that, in fact, almost every perception I held was incorrect. I'm going to give you some examples because I could never have gotten through this without this foundation in the first place. And the first thing he said, which was hugely comforting, obviously, with me in this situation, is everything that comes to you is for your benefit. This is gigantic, and that's a 180 flip. Rather than the, why did this happen to me? It's like, okay, this is wonderful. It's going to be to my advantage. So my teacher said that in answer to your prayers for consciousness and for peace, everything that comes to you is helping you answer that prayer. And that regardless of how it looks, regardless of how the package is wrapped, it's still a present. So, This made me understand that, okay, this is a message that I needed to hear that I sent myself. And this was also super important for me. The second thing my teacher said, and this is where I encounter most resistance whenever I talk about this, and I think it's very natural because it involves such a 180 switch, but not so much for people in this room, which is the mind actually controls the body 100%. So, you know, this whole idea of the toxins and all this stuff out here that is about to annihilate us, we see that the body is actually in an effect of the mind, all right? So, the biggest difficulty in encountering this belief is the guilt that arises. It's like, oh, I did this to myself. Why did I do this? All that stuff we go through. But if immediately we've translated into this is a gift, that can change a little bit. So then begins my mental inquiry into why did I create this? Okay, if it really is in my mind, and so that's what I invite you right now, is not to believe what I'm saying or imagine that it's absolutely gospel truth, but simply a lens to look through. And I'm saying that looking through this lens was immensely helpful for me for answering the question, why did this happen to me? And this is a vitally important question to answer. And most of us don't answer it because the guilt level immediately comes up. And we also get too distracted, we get too busy, and we also start feeling like it's too big a question to answer. And so all that stuff comes up immediately. But if we persevere, So the first stage is taking full 100% responsibility. That was very tough. But again, I was just looking through this lens, all right? So after that, I found, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about with these 180-degree shifts, because I know this is confusing. But there's 5 words in the English language that illustrate it beautifully. And it also illustrates when we change the meaning of the word, then you can see how much easier healing becomes. You can see this direct route to healing. So I'm going to begin with the first word, which is the granddaddy of them all. Each of these words, I say, holds our mind in bondage in very unconscious ways. And the first word, 3 letters, very powerful, very imprisoning. And the word is sin. And I'm saying that regardless of what religion you come from, which part of the world you come from, most people on this earth are held in bondage by an idea that we could do something that's unforgivable. It's really, really bad, and you're going to attract punishment for this unforgivable thing. This is obviously very deeply deep in our psychology and our psyche. And that's, of course, the origin of the word guilt. But if we look at the original meaning of the word sin, and this is very, very, very exciting, because the whole flip happens right here. It was originally an archery term, which meant missing the mark, right? So you got this huge quiver of arrows, literally limitless, and you've got, in order to learn how to hit that mark, you've got to miss it a whole bunch of times, millions of times, right? So these mistakes, they become mistakes, and at the same moment, if you accept this paradigm shift, this 180-degree shift on this word, guilt goes out the window, and so does punishment. So we're in a place to do the inquiry where we have a lot more compassion, a lot more forgiveness, a lot more calm, and then we can proceed to the second word. The second word is one that I think is even more hidden than the word sin, and is the word selfish. And I came up very hard against this word as I was recovering. It took a lot of time for me to recover because I was very, very exhausted in the first place. And so I had to be very selfish. I finally learned for the first time in my life how to put myself first, because if I didn't, I would die. Very simple, very clear. And that's one of the great gifts of a really big trauma, is that it suddenly makes you rethink everything, right? How can I be giving tons to other people when really, obviously, the disease is telling me, you need to fill yourself up, honey. Just you. You take care of you. And do this inquiry, and it takes a lot of time. And so we come again to the third word, which is the word lazy. Oh, what a horrific word that is. We've made it so bad. But we must be super lazy in order to recover from major trauma, accidents, diseases. We have to be extremely quiet. And in fact, that is what the disease or the accident or the trauma is come to us for, is so that we can be lazy and selfish and go deep into ourselves and listen, so that we can be quiet enough to listen to the whisperings of our soul. And this is the point of all negatives, at least I believe this now. The negative stuff coming at us is saying, wait, you're kind of off. You're not really in alignment with yourself. And it gives us an opportunity to get back into that alignment, but not unless we're good and lazy, we abolish the word sin, and we're selfish. So the next word is nowhere. What I've noticed with grief or a big diagnosis like mine or an accident is that we go into a fog almost immediately. And that fog makes us go, God, I don't feel like doing anything. I don't feel like talking. I don't feel like eating. I don't feel like seeing anybody. I feel like crawling under the covers and, like that. And I'm just in this totally nowhere place. Now, I want to say this is actually wonderful, because if you split the word, you now see what's really starting to happen here. Now, here. Now you're here. Now you're in the present. Because the other thing that trauma does is it annihilates our future very suddenly. All these dreams we had about the future just collapse. And we suddenly realized there was a total fantasy. So we're now here, and we can really do the inquiry. And because it's being present that the whole thing wanted us to be in the first place. It is our wonderful little sort of Skinner bell reminding us to come back to listening. When we're listening and quiet, then we can see where we went off course, where we can go to build a life that really works for us. So finally we come to the word stress. And I'm saying with stress, again, we have to make a shift in our perspective. Because often I see we're blaming stress that's happening out here, the boyfriend, the job, the something out here. But what I'm saying we have to do is to look inside for the source of our stresses, which cause the ones on the outside, because it needs to be reflected. And these inner stresses have to do with conflict. And it's the self against the self. The self not allowing the self to do what it wants. The self not allowing the self to speak what it wants. A million things we don't allow. And what I'm saying is stress causes conflict. Conflict causes friction. Friction causes heat. Heat causes inflammation. And what's the source of all disease? Inflammation. So it's really fascinating. It's like going back to the mind for all of this. But the biggest part of my recovery came in examining the place where I had the absolute most stress and most conflict. And that was in my attitudes towards life and death. There was a whole lot of behaviors and stuff I discovered in really, really looking at this that really weren't contributing to a healthy life. So what I did was I actually got pen and paper out and wrote a list of why do you want to die. You've attracted a life-threatening disease, then some part of you must want to die. And this was the most important part of the whole inquiry, was actually facing that. So at this moment, I had it. Also, my teacher said, we actually have a choice in when we die and how we die. Our entire life is a choice. So I thought, okay, I don't want to die. I figured that much out. So then I saw that one must make a conscious decision and see which parts of one are leaning towards death, which parts are leaning towards life. So this whole inquiry brought me to the place of, really understanding what my teacher was saying when he said, you create your own reality. And I've been terrified to actually apply that to health and healing. I'd never had any opportunity. One, I was totally healthy all that time. But now that I've had the opportunity and got to embody a lot of these ideas, now I just want to shout it out because it's so exciting. I think we need to come back to the mind, first and foremost, as every avatar that has ever come to the planet has said, the mind is the great creator. Why are we forgetting this totally? Why aren't we teaching our children in school how to use the mind properly? And that's what I think the new psychology actually needs to focus on now, which is how are you using your mind? Are you watching your mind 24/7? If you're not, 9/10 of it's going to go unconscious. How do you do that? How do you learn to choose which thoughts are helping you towards life and which are helping you towards death? These must be seen. We have to start recognizing this stuff, right? So I think that's about it, actually. I'm going to leave you on that note, and I'm going to thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about this stuff. Don't forget how important this is, especially with the very first thing about, okay, we have to heal. Let's look here first. Thank you very much.